Kurt.
Hello, David. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the March 16, 2019 webisode of ArtStream Live.
Right.
And tonight we have
we're having a thing about old people.
And we fit right in, I'm afraid.
Like old leprechauns.
Turn my head the right way. Aye! Kichteblar nicht tun.
Yeah.
It's that time of the year, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
All right.
St. Patty's Day.
St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, the 17th. But yeah, we got a subject tonight about how does time and age affect artists.
Right.
Something we're all going to go through.
We're learning it.
Yeah, we're learning it. And doesn't matter what age you are, you're going to learn it too. So tonight we'll get into that.
Yeah, I got a little video that'll set the mood here.
All right, let's do that.
Here we go.
Oh, that's a good quote.
Yep.
Good quote, like that. We'll go right into it tonight. So, tonight, ArtStream Live presents Older Artists, New Tricks, the Effect of Time and Aging on Artists. Kind of thought that was fun graphics. So
Yeah.
Thought we'd start off tonight with a couple of statements there. Like, what is creativity? Well, it's originality, and it's the ability to create, conceive, and produce something new and unusual, right? And I thought this was neat. Creativity is a highly desirable skill at any age, and has been considered to vary or change during the aging process. So
a lot of influences.
Yeah, so let's start with a couple of questions too. Time for some questions. You know, ArtStream Live, we do ask big questions. So
that's right. We write them down.
And we write them down. They're so big. But you know, what has the most? You know, like it said right here, how is creative productivity distributed across the lifespan? Does it change as you get older or younger? You know, what's the difference? What has the most effect on your creativity? Getting older, aging, or changing styles? And what about, is there an old age style when an artist does his best work?
Good question.
It is a good question. And by the way, I want people to know too, this concept, we had it at the beginning, but David came up with a concept.
Yeah.
Thought that was a good idea. Now, here's another good question. Do old artists lose their skill, their imagination, or creative drive? Now, here's a good one too. I like this. Should the success of older artists be considered as a matter of historical judgment? We'll talk about that a little bit. I think that's a good question. And here's the ultimate. Is it time we just quit worrying about age, obsession with age?
Yeah.
You know? So,
can't do much about it.
Well, we're going to get into some of those questions tonight, and we'll talk about it. So here we go. Now, but wait, there's more. Just when you thought it didn't make any difference, we've got this nice gentleman right here. Now, this guy is a PhD, Dean Keith Simonton, PhD, and you see down there his credentials at the University of California at Davis. This guy has studied it.
Right.
And he studied different professions, artists, accountants, military, scientific. And what he's found out is when you measure it over into periods of time, it could be 5 years, a year, a decade, whatever. But what he's found out, there's a curve that it seems to follow no matter what culture or what job, but it's a bell curve, and it shows that usually somewhere in the 20s, there's a big increase in productivity for creativity. It's rapid, and then usually sometime when you're 30s and 40s, you start to peak, and after that, it's a gradual decline.
It's interesting because most people in the executive world, they usually say that their career peaks in their early 50s.
Yeah, and
it's a little different.
The thing about the studies, it is somewhat of a generality because there are exceptions.
Yeah.
And there are certain, like you said, a lot of people would think an older executive because of his experience. Now, is he still as creative with the ideas he comes up with? I don't know. But that's a balance between experience and creativity. But we're going to get into that too and how it relates to artists. So, now, what about an old-fashioned point of view about it? I call it an old-fashioned master's view.
The old-fashioned.
And I thought this was neat because remember we talked about the idea of time and age affecting artists.
Right.
Well, time affects things too. Like less than 200 years ago, the idea of a late life creativity being significant, they'd never heard of it. It didn't make any difference to them. They actually thought late works were often inferior. And a lot of art critics thought that at the time. They thought like the older artists, their work wasn't as good as their younger work.
Well, back then, probably more disease.
Yeah.
They didn't, medical treatments were pretty basic.
Well, that was the thing, too. If you were just...
By the time you were 45, you're pretty much gone.
If you were lucky enough to be alive,
right.
Yeah, so... But there were some other thoughts that we'll share with this idea, the old point of view. Like their whole artistic career was built on the guild system. You became an apprentice, and then hopefully you became a master. And then usually you have a decline, and your creativity would decline. Like we said, if you managed to live to old age, if you lived.
Right.
But the guild craftsman system, that was their art market. That's all they had. They did contract work for the aristocracy or the church. They didn't have museums or galleries or auction houses or art.
They didn't sit on the corner and sell their art.
They didn't have any of that. So this is what they had to work with. And some of them were creative within that system. But that was basically the route you took. And it's like I said, they worked in that environment, traditional environment, to make their own style. Hopefully they got better in their skills and ability, and that gave them a reputation where patrons would come and hire them and seek them out. And one thing I thought was interesting too back then is art styles didn't change.
No,
they really didn't. The major styles, like it says there, the Renaissance influence had an artistic influence for like 500 years. So they weren't. Once they had a style, that was what their style was.
That was pretty much it.
So that was part of their process of time and aging, what they went through back then. So the way people sit in different times is different.
Right.
Like I thought this was neat. The late life styles of artists like Michelangelo and Titian, they were condemned by the critics, and they because like both of them got looser. Titian especially, he got very loose, almost impressionistic. They figured he was having dementia or mental age problems or physical problems.
Couldn't see.
So they attributed it to that. They didn't think it was more important. And the idea of this late life creativity spurt really got started in the 19th century, and then it got celebrated more as we got into the 20th century. So the idea didn't even exist really 200 years ago. This is how people looked at it. And we'll get into that a little bit more now. I like this idea. So we kind of see what it was like back then. So, seeing older artists in the past, we're kind of looking at art in the rearview mirror, and that's Rembrandt if he had a car. That'd be him looking behind. And what I thought about, we're used to modernism.
Right.
So that's got to affect the way we see art and art in the past, because we're looking through that lens. So how does that affect how we see the achievements of artists like Michelangelo or Titian? The idea that back then they were criticized for their later styles, I got a feeling we see it different.
Right.
Like it says there, the late life qualities that were condemned, we consider now to be great examples of artistic creativity in their later life. So we value them now. Back then they weren't valued. So
it's a good thing.
And here's some examples, like the influence Michelangelo had helped lead to the Baroque, time period in art. And the same thing with Titian. He led in mannerism. So these late works, and these are examples of works late in their life. These are actual pieces they did much more near their end of life. And yet they had an incredible influence over time. But at the time, nothing special.
Yeah.
Just a couple old artists that were...
A couple old farts making art.
Making art, couldn't do as good as they used to do. So, So I thought, well, okay, now we get into this idea of out with the old, in with the new. Really? Well, I want to know what happened, what changed to make things look different to people now in the modern art world. And one of the things that was major is that the church and aristocracy, as they lost power, artists no longer served their function for those people. They didn't have a need for them. So that kind of makes it hard when you're used to a system.
That's a lot of money there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, things had to change, and they did. We'll get into that. Some of the things, the art world had to become self-sustaining, and that's how they developed into art markets like galleries and dealers and agents and art reviews and auction houses. So all that got started. And for young artists, innovation and newness was what they needed to stand out. They needed to get public attention.
Right.
So that was part of what went on, and then traditional artists began to be regarded as out of date, and they lost their status and their value. So, this is part of what's going on today. Younger artists were considered more innovative and sought out more widely. And then, this resulted in styles, which we talked about the Renaissance style lasting so much longer. Well, art styles didn't dominate. They kept dominating for shorter periods of time, like the cult of the new helped make one artism after another. So styles are changing much more
collectors
rapidly.
are always in the search to find the new artist before anybody else.
Yeah, find the new. What's the new?
Always searching for the new.
And one thing that's done is produced a drop in the age of artists that are considered more significant. So younger and younger artists are now being considered important, whereas back in Michelangelo's time, they were just becoming apprenticed, working their way to masters.
They worked for years before they were recognized.
Now you're having a retrospective when you're in your 30s, And one thing that helped contribute to all this was the university academic world. More artists are getting degrees, are getting BFAs, and this helped make the art more conceptual and philosophical. And one of the things, too, that the academic world has done, they come up with these art theories and put them in their curriculum, like postmodernism, deconstruction ideas. And what this has done, it makes these unconventional mediums become accepted as art forms.
Right.
So we're reaching a point, and we'll get to it, where anything can be art. But in the art schools, art schools are turning out more and more and all young artists. So they're all coming out, they want recognition, and they're going to do whatever they can, find whatever they can to get attention. And it's like this feeds the art machine. It feeds the galleries. It feeds the museums. It's like they have to have it to keep, like you said, what's the new, to present to the collectors.
Got to have something new.
Yeah. So all that's going on, and this affects how older artists are looked at in society and the importance of their creativity.
Well, there's only so much room there, so the more young and new, the less room there is.
And that's not saying that older artists can't be creative, but sometimes when you're competing against the idea of the cult of the nude, it almost like you can't get the attention. It's not in the reviews. It's not put out there for people to see because they're feeding on the young.
Right.
And that affects it. So that's created an age where like anything and everything can be rationalized, become art. It's art. I mean, a guy can sweep the floor, put it in a pile, stick it in the middle of a gallery, and it becomes artwork. Hey,
sweeping the floor is artwork.
Yeah, we one of the things we've shown on ArtStream Live, one of our segments, I haven't done it in a while, but remember we had the segment, is it art? Well, yeah. And it's like it said, now traditional art forms like painting, they're kind of thought to be old artist art mediums, which I kind of hate, but that's how it's looked at.
Right. And
they become less significant, and that lowers the status of older artists working in the other mediums. So all these things, but not just age alone, but time and society, they also affect older artists. Like you said, just getting old, you can't see as good, your hands don't work as good. So yeah, it's harder. But here's another good question. I call this one breaking the mold, a radical lifestyle changer. Like the question said, what if an artist's style in later life is radically different from their earlier style? What happens? Do they get noticed? Well, I think we've got a good example here. This guy, Philip Guston. This guy is a great example of somebody breaking the mold. There's the young Philip, and this is what he was doing. You had abstract expressionism, and he's like a leading art expressionist, abstract expressionist, getting major recognition. This is the kind of work he was doing, and this is what he worked on. There's a couple examples of what he was doing. In his art, but watch what he does later. Now here's the older Philip Guston, and look now,
Let's go back to the previous.
Let's go back and look at that. This is quite a change.
Now let's go forward.
Now he's got subject and narrative, and this is what he was doing. And down there on the right is a major art critic, a gentleman named Robert Hughes, who I love to listen to. He's passed away, but he was a great critic. He thought Philip had gone crazy. Literally, he thought he had gone crazy. He wrote a scathing review.
And he could do that.
And he could. And a lot of people thought he'd gone crazy, but Philip didn't care. He kept doing what he did. And who do you think was right? Was Philip Guston right or Robert Hughes?
From what perspective? I mean, from the artist.
From time, Guston was right. Hughes ended up apologizing to him because what happened, the works that Philip Guston created, these new works, had a terrific influence on the up-and-coming younger artists. And he was a major influence And so Hughes realized that, yes, he was valuable, what he had done. So here's an old artist that broke the mold and pulled it off late in life, and he did it. Now, there aren't as many examples. There are other examples. I mean, Matisse could be one. Rembrandt's one.
Jasper Johns.
Cindy Sherman's doing pieces about older age that we could get into. We don't have time, but you're right, Jasper Johns. So there are other examples, but Philip Guston is just such a good example of it. So, I mean, like you said, that go back one more time. Just
one more time.
One more time. I mean, that is an incredible switch.
Yeah, that's on either side of town there.
Yeah.
That's just...
that so I thought he was a great example to bring up. And he did a style change, answered the question. That's what made it work for him. Now, are there any advantages to being an old artist? Well, are there? I tried to list a few.
You're alive.
You're alive. That's the first one. Yeah, you're actually alive. And like you can read them there, you have more experience. You know, that's one thing. You could have varied experiences that you could put into your art. And because of your experiences, you might have a more sensitivity and reflective eye for major themes in art. You know, and age people alone, like you said, they're survivors. They have a sense of what works and what doesn't. Now, sometimes that can be to your disadvantage. You might limit your creativity if you get locked in, because it's easy to get repetitive. And then, you know, the idea of retirement, like you had at the beginning, it's really not something that applies to the artistic population.
No.
If you can see and use your hands, you can make art. Use your head. Use your mind. And then the idea that a lot of the personality aspects that made you an artist, they do continue on in older life. Like, you know, artists tend to be, you know, they tend to be more assertive and independent. They do resist authority. They have egos. You got to have an ego to be an artist. You got to have some confidence. And you have a high tolerance for ambiguity, I think. And because one thing I've noticed if you study art history, some of the most turbulent times in the history of man are some of the greatest art creative moments ever. So artists seem to do well on that. And we're risk takers.
Right.
So I thought that was a good subject tonight.
We take a risk every time we try to do one of these webcasts.
We do take a risk every time, and hopefully the risk is paid off tonight and you've enjoyed it. So that was I like that subject. Good going. David came up with that idea, and there's our fair use credits.
Yep.
I just like the smiling older gentleman there. I thought it was fun to put up. So there it is. I'm going to get rid of that there and the notes thing.
We have...
oh, yeah.
Yeah. A funky find on the interwebs.
A funky find on the interweb. Well, this will be good.
We haven't had one in a while.
Was this a late artist? Late?
I think this is sort of a
mid-career
well,
artist. Let's see what he's doing.
Yeah.
Funky video find on the interweb.
You don't see that every day.
Funky video find on the interweb.
All right. It lived up to the name. That is a funky find. I like it.
Stepping out.
So it's a good way to wrap up the program tonight.
Yeah, one more thought.
Yes.
I looked at several of his pieces.
Okay.
I looked him up. And one thing I've noticed about a lot of people, artists who produce a lot of really interesting things like that, is after 10 or 15 years of making them, they still have a lot of them.
They still have a lot of them on hand.
They are very interesting, but not very many homes are conducive to having those things.
That's something we didn't even get into about artists maybe having a lack of creativity and overrating. They just don't have anywhere to put the stuff anymore.
They can't afford a warehouse.
They can't keep making it because they got nowhere to keep it. So that could be a factor. Hey, it could be. So,
and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. There you go. So, yep, that'll be tomorrow. So, I think that's a good way to wrap up our webisode tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it. And they know where to find us. I think you've done a little work on our webpage. That's nice.
Yeah, I have.
ArtStreamLive.com.
Spruced it up a little bit.
And we're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. So, check us out. Like
ArtStreamLive.com. They'll find the email addresses there.
And right, too. If you got something you think you'd like us to cover, drop us an email.
And they'll find links to this live presentation. So.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you, David. Good to be here tonight. And And hope everyone enjoyed it. And who knows what's coming next month? But we'll find
never
something.
know.
You never know on ArtStream Live. All right. Well, good night, everybody. Thank you for watching.
See ya. Look at that. Cannot publish Facebook again. I did a test not more than 45 minutes ago. Everything was perfect. Everything was working. I didn't touch anything. I hit saved and I went downstairs and got a cup of coffee.
Yeah, that was it right
And
there.
I come back up. It's you. That's what it is.
No,
It's you.